my name is Jonathan Green, and I know some of you are familiar with me either through my programs on Katie Cruza or Raggedy Ann and Andy or on the Edith Flack Ackley dolls. And I know some of you think that this is my collection, but I have a very eclectic collection and I want to share some of that with you. I've always thought that all dolls go together. I've never been able to be a blah, blah, blah only type of collector. So anyway, we are going to go into the doll room shortly, but before I have a few caveats. One of which is this is going to be, for want of a better way of saying it, a bit of a drive-by. If I actually sat and spent time with every category of doll that I collect, we would be here all day long. And the other thing is that I am what one would call an encyclopedic collector, which for some of you that may just be a fancy way of saying hoarder, but that's what it is. I've never been the type of person who can have like one or two examples to represent the doll in my collection. No. So you will see that there's a lot of breadth in my collection. There's also a lot of depth in my collection. I'm not showing you every doll I own in a particular category. In some cases, I've sort of lumped like dolls together just to make it a little more efficient. So I hope that you will enjoy this little peek into my collection. And I guess let's just get started. Our first stop in our trip through the sewing are Puppenschneiderei. These were complicated sewing sets that started in the 1880s and continued through the 1930s. These were intended to teach a little girl of the ages 10 to 12 how to sew clothing for her family. These were not like the American rainy day sets that had T-shaped garments and some very basic embroidery for the child to do. These had set-in sleeves, French seams, and all kinds of elaborate details to be done. Now, of course, if something is successful, which these were, then you end up having the small edition and the very small edition. And then there was the deluxe edition with a K-Star R doll. And this last one is the doll that was done in the 1930s. And of course, that's something as Americans we have sometimes trouble grasping that, yes, they were still doing jointed-bodied bisque head dolls in the 1930s. The interesting thing about these sets is that these were produced by publishers, not doll makers, basically up until World War II. And then after World War II, when these dolls were, a version of them at least, was still being made, they were produced by people who made board games, which is kind of an interesting variation. And often when I find these, it is actually through a bookseller rather than from a doll outlet of any sort. The next stop on the sewing thread, so to speak, are the Bucilla kits. These are from the 1920s into the early 30s. Bucilla actually stands for Bernard Ullman Company. It's not Italian and it is pronounced Bucilla. But they produced numerous kits during this time. This cloth doll to make is very hard to find. I have numerous of the boudoir kits. These were extremely popular. Here are the packets of the boudoir that would not have come with the bonnets or hats. Again, this composition baby to knit for is very hard to find. And then up here are the kits with the pre-printed fabric that you would embroider and then sew together. And you can see some of the different styles here. And then this is a little celluloid clown head for a clown toy, and that sort of 18th century woman is a sewing kit. So I have the kit and the doll made up. We are still in Bucilla, but these are kits from the 40s and 50s. And you can see these all have a mask face. This one is interesting because it's an Edith Flack Ackley knockoff. I don't believe it was licensed. And more Bucilla, again, probably off-license Alice in Wonderland to go with the Disney movie, and more of the cloth kits. So still in the world of Bucilla, this is Baby Mine and Boopsie. These were two hard plastic dolls made by Ideal, and they were intended for the craft market. These were dolls that you could knit for, or crochet for, or turn into powder containers. But Bucilla also did a large line of craft kits for these dolls. And the craft kits are kind of amazing. The ribbon is of the general florist ribbon variety, but the fabrics are really quite nice. Cotton organdies, lawns, good quality flannel. So I really love these kits. In addition to the usual baby clothes, there's cowboy outfits and sailors, and there's the bedding. So it's really quite lovely. Now, of course, talking about dolls and sewing, there has to be Mary Hoyer, and these are just a few of my Mary Hoyer dolls. And many of these, like this composition girl with the fur cape, has a Mary Hoyer trunk, one of the cedar trunks with several factory-made Mary Hoyer costumes. That's one of the early Mary Hoyers, where she bought the doll from the Ideal company. It has a swivel waist. This doll in the floral print also has a large wardrobe. I could never pass up buying any of these little floral print dresses. She has like 100. I'm not exaggerating. She probably does have 100. This doll in the back in the midnight blue, that is a doll that I made the clothing for. Mary Lynn Saunders would have sewing days at her showroom in Pennsylvania, and these were wonderful events. I miss them like crazy. They were always great fun, and Mary Lynn was a wonderful hostess. So that is that. And of course, the doll with the magic wand. To finish up the world of sewing, here are a few last dolls. There's the Marie Francois doll, which had clothing in the women's magazine Mode et Travaux in France. Of course, Bluette. I don't particularly like large dolls, so I have the mini Letty Lane. And of course, Gail Wilson. I did make the American Girl doll on the left. And like everyone else, I have a bin of Gail Wilson kits that I will make up someday. And the Bella dolls, which also had patterns available for their clothing. Lastly, I have the Wilde and Spieth millinery shop, which has all the little wooden hats, and you can see the paper hat brims there on the bottom rack. But there's also patterns for making clothing for the mannequins to go to the hats. Now, what's interesting about this is Wilde and Spieth was actually a manufacturer of sort of mid-century modern high-design chairs. And they produced this set after World War II because it was something that was easily exportable. And between 1945 and about 1949, anything made had to be exported. You weren't allowed to make things actually for the local market. And so this wonderful little set was made for export, and you will notice that it does say in English, the doll's fashion shop. These are some of my favorite antique dolls. If I showed you all of my antique dolls, we would be here all day, but I wanted to show you some of the dolls that are my favorite or mean the most to me. And one of them is this Cameron Reinhardt 100, the so-called Kaiser baby on a toddler body. This is correct. It does show up in catalogs, but the early collectors had very rigid and very inaccurate notions of what was right and wrong. And so these dolls were often, or these heads had the bodies swapped for a baby. The doll next to it in the blue and pink, I love because I got it from its original owner. It was purchased in 1933 during a transatlantic crossing. So once again, this is a fired bisque head on a ball-jointed body from the 1930s. I love this tiny little German. It has a dome head. These dolls I love, even though I know very little about them. These have paper mache heads and these carton bodies covered with pink cloth. And one of these days, I hope to find out more about them. I've been told they were made in Spain, but I really know very little about them. I have the little Kessner dwarf baby, which again is one of those totally weird dolls that I love. And I have a little collection of Eunice France here, which again, these dolls are something that appeal to me. I like dolls that children actually played with. And speaking of dolls that children played with, I have a collection of AM390s and AM370s. I love these are dolls that children actually played with. And I also love the variety one can find. I mean, the doll in the back here has a very good quality body, good quality head, good quality wig. The doll in front has a very poor quality head. They didn't even bother to varnish the parts of the clothing, the parts of the body that would be covered by clothing. Then there's the painted bisque version down here. And I will tell you, if you ever want to distress a wig, just let your cat get a hold of it for about 10 minutes. The doll in the back is also a subcategory that I collect, which are dolls in black clothing. It was actually quite common for antique dolls to have black clothing, but a lot of it has been removed to put it in something more appealing to modern collectors. I love the dolls with the pink bodies, and so that's sort of another subcategory of mine. And the patent washables are, again, dolls that children actually played with, and there's something that appealed to me. Now, the other subcategory of dolls that you can see here is probably the most popular doll. I think almost every collector owns them, and that is the doll that you're going to dress one day. And needless to say, I have a lot of these dolls, from the German bisques to Katie Kruse to even Raggedy and Andy. But there they are in all their naked glory. When discussing antique dolls, I overlooked two that really do need to be brought to your attention. One of them is this lovely German wax doll with her all original factory dress. And the other one is a German version of an American mama doll. The Germans at that time, they copied anything and everything. But while two different ends of the spectrum, these are both two antique dolls that are very, very special in my collection. These are my dolls by Elsa Hecht. Hecht in German means pike, like the fish. And that was her logo, was a fish. And she made dolls and had a shop in Munich from the 1930s on. The dolls were still being sold in the 50s, but I have no idea whether Elsa Hecht was still involved in their manufacture. The dolls are very distinctive with their molded felt faces and shoe button eyes. The Casper is the sort of reformed Casper of the 1930s. He was sort of made, quite frankly, to look less Jewish. Elsa Hecht was very well known for her hand puppets, and there's an enormous variety of these. She also made egg cozies, small little travel dolls. These little green figures are little sprites that live in the rivers and cause all kinds of trouble. The two clowns there are handkerchief bags. These two are the first dolls are actually puppets that I bought. And if you can see on her, there are these yarn flowers, which are very typical of what is found on Elsa Hecht's work. Also, Elsa apparently was an early retailer for Dora Petzold and may have actually dressed some of the Dora Petzold dolls. These are some of my absolutely favorite dolls. These are by Brune-hilled Einenkel, and she started making dolls in the 1920s, and she continued to make them through the 1960s. The last 20 years would have been in the East Germany. And I think her dolls are wonderful, whimsical, and sometimes strange. I love the fact that her shock-haired Peter is a brunette rather than a blonde. And since she was in East Germany, she did a lot of the characters from the Baltic Sea, which is very special to me. And as I said, I love these dolls. We live in an international world now with Facebook and the internet. And I have to tell you, I don't know anyone else who collects these dolls, which is just fine. I love them. And you need to collect what you like. And if someone else collects it, that's fine. If you don't have anyone else to share your passion with, that's fine too. Just always collect what you like and don't worry about what anyone else thinks or has to say about it. Speaking of East Germany, one of my passions is dolls from East Germany. And here you can see a few from my collection. The girl with the ponytail and the blue jacket is a Klötzer doll from East Germany. The tailors are Meister Nadelöhr, or Master Needle Ear. In Germany, needles have ears, not eyes. He was the presenter for a German children's TV program. Of course, lots of little Ari dolls or dolls from August Riedler. These are always my favorites. Have to have the Sandman, which was also a character from a German TV show. Patty was a popular dress-up doll, much like the British Amanda Jane. I mentioned my connection to the Baltic Sea, and these strand basket or strand korb are very much of that area. And the Barbie-like doll is Steffi, which was the German Barbie. Now, this is not a good representation of Steffi. This doll probably was made for one of the trade shows or messes. It's much better quality than Steffi that would have been available to the general public. And of course, most of you have seen these little suitcases, which I think are just adorable. And these were made in East Germany, and they were made through the 1960s. The other thing I love are the German bathrooms, which this was something that is very typical of German playthings from the 50s. Now, obviously, these would have been a fantasy East Germany, West Germany, or even the United States. These were just meant as playthings. Those are two of the Kramerpuppen that I love so much. And then the cleaning closets, which again, I think are really just wonderful and sort of great imaginative play for a child. It probably isn't much of a surprise to you that I collect Swiss woodens. This is a small part of my collection. And you can see I have all different styles, boys, shoulder heads, a tiny little one. Do have to let you know that the two dolls on the left are actually not Swiss woodens. They are knockoffs from the Dolomite region of Italy. And up here, there are a few more. The baby and the girl in brown have one of those oddly shaped disjointed cloth bodies. The girl on the stand has a more proportioned body, two more heads, and then these are a pair of later dolls that are highly colored and have wonderful costumes. And of course, when discussing wooden dolls, I have to have some of my antique Groener dolls and related. As you can see, I really love the bobbed-haired Groener dolls from the 1920s. I think they're a lot of fun and very different. I have this large doll. I love this poor little penny wooden that's missing half of its face, but you know, they painted it and sent it out anyway. And then over here are some other dolls, including two dolls that are probably from Thuringia that are very much carved in the style of a porcelain doll. And the two on the bottom, the pair, were apparently from Venice, Italy, as opposed to the Groener doll region. I mentioned that there are some dolls that will lead you to other dolls, which will then lead you to other dolls. And this is a good example. These are Ruth Gibbs dolls. They were made in Flemington, New Jersey, though the porcelain work, surprisingly, or the ceramic work, I should say, was surprisingly done in Pennsylvania, not in Flemington, in spite of Flemington's reputation as a pottery town. But these dolls are actually what got me started on Edith Flack Ackley. I did a program on these, and a woman brought in a 3-inch Edith Flack Ackley with the Christmas card. And that is what got me back into Edith Flack Ackley. Now, from Edith Flack Ackley, it's not hard to imagine going into the Polly Shorrock dolls. These were designed by Alice Wainwright. They were originally from Marblehead, Massachusetts. Again, they have that sort of old-fashioned girl look that is typical Ackley. They were sold out of the backs of women's magazines with small advertisements. You could get a catalog where they showed you the fabric choices that were available at the time. And, you know, now that I live in New England, the little boy in the slicker has particular meaning to me. And there are a lot of different faces found on these dolls. The doll in the red towards the center, I think, has been repainted. The doll with the white face to look like a china has side curls and a bow. And then that doll that has not been made has painted ringlets on the side. And of course, as you can see, these dolls came in kits, which also make them part of the sewing thread to my collection. These are probably a bit of a surprise, but yes, I collect Joan Walsh Anglin dolls. In fact, I love anything that was done by Determined Productions in the 1970s. I really think they captured the look of the 1970s in a marvelous way. I also have to say I'm a bit annoyed I can't find the bin with all the dolls in their original boxes, because the graphics on those are just fabulous. But if you look at the Snoopy images to the left, you can get an idea of what the graphics on those boxes would look like. Now, the other thing I collect are what I call boutique dolls. And these are the dolls that, when I was out shopping with my mother at Backstreet or one of those other 70s clothing boutiques, this is what you would see, or in some cases, something like that. Now, the dolls in the center with the tin glazed heads, those are German. They would not have been available in the United States. They were made by Elsie Hoffman. I think they're kind of wonderful. and you really can't see, but under the clothes they all have decorated shoulder plates, and in some cases decorated underwear. Now the dolls on the right are Limmerpuppen, and these were readily available in the United States. What's interesting about these is that they are natural rubber, which would have been highly unusual in the 1970s. Also that the bodies aren't stuffed. There actually is a rubber torso and rubber arms and legs that are then sort of in a union suit. What is also fun about this kind of is that Limmer is a company that was best known for vinyl novelties. If you remember that sort of kneeling nude vinyl doll that had the flimsy nylon negligee over it, that was made by Limmer. They also made vinyl lawn gnomes. Now, the little wooden doll, I just think it's kind of marvelous and has a lovely kind of mid-century feel to it, and I love the colors and fabrics. I have included the Toy Works Two-Face doll because those were everywhere in the 70s, either like this or they came in a calico dress. And I've included the China shoulder head because those Japanese reproduction China dolls in their calico dresses were also something that you would find in nearly every clothing boutique in the 1970s. So to sort of add to my collection of 60s, 70s weird and wonderful, these are my Virginia Black dolls. And some of you probably remember the greeting cards that used Virginia Black's figures as characters. And she also did the hillbilly pattern for McCall's Pattern Company. But these are some of her dolls. And I just think they're totally wonderful in their kind of bizarre quality. I love this trashy dame with her red nose. And of course, then there's the grumpy, dowdy one here. But these are all sitting because they're all stuffed with sand and were obviously not intended to be on a doll stand, but were to be displayed sort of lounging or perched on a bookshelf or something like that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed these because they're really not something you see every day. So I showed you a lot of dolls in a very formal setting. I wanted to show you how some of the dolls actually are in our house. And so this is just sort of my catch-all cabinet of all of my little bits and pieces of things that make me happy. This is another cabinet just to show you a few things. These are Kachina dolls that my family and I picked up when I was about 10, 12 years old and we went through the Southwest. These are my Venton Coon figurines. Some of those are quite old. They're from the 30s. This is kind of just my eclectic Anna Fairley dolls. There's an Anna Fairley figurine. This little mechanical stork. Some Alice in Wonderland figurines. Some of those little miniatures from the Dolomites. Paper mache. Again, a Pinocchio from the Dolomites. There's a Kentucky Poppet. Lots of sort of, I like dolls that children played with. So these are sort of like dolls that German children would have actually played with. And then down here, some American cloth dolls, which I used to have the ID on these, and then my computer crashed and I lost it. So I no longer know who made these dolls. And here are just hiding in here from moths. These are crocheted dolls. There's a little Dutch boy and a little Dutch girl. So these are just some of the dolls that are actually in the living area of our house. Of course, the Raggedy Ann and Andes, these are the early Muskegon ones. Oh, and I didn't hit my little woolies. This is what I call a passive collection. I don't actively collect those, but you know, if they fall into my lap, I buy them. I hope you have enjoyed this little visit in my doll room. There's one category of doll that did not make it into the program, and those are my tout en bois dolls. And the reason is that it's very hot and humid in New Hampshire at the moment, and it's just not responsible to have them out. They're in a nice climate-controlled environment, sort of hibernating until it's safe to have them out. So I hope you saw some dolls that you thought were interesting, and maybe you want to know a little bit more about them. And if that's the case, I would be more than willing to do so. So anyway, thank you very much for joining me, and I hope to see you again very, very soon.